Bobblehead partners are back. Soccerwise is here, ready to break down some NWSL with David Goss. And yes, you know her name very well. Jordan Angelis back in the saddle. Jordan, it has been a while. Does it feel good? Did the theme song hit?
It did very much so. And it feels good. Gosh, it's been over a month, like almost 2 months.
Yeah.
I think since we last recorded a full episode together. So yeah, it feels good to be back.
I assumed you listened to the theme song every morning when you woke up in New Zealand and Australia.
Yeah, it is my alarm clock.
It is called Winners Only. So it's like a good inspirational wake-up song for everyone out there, not just us. We have a huge show coming up today. We have an interview with Yazmeen Ryan, one of the big moves so far of the offseason. If you're listening to the podcast, you will hear that in a moment. If you're watching on YouTube later, it is a separate video that you have to go watch there. We will dig into all of the current news, obviously the huge breaking news around the case against NWSL from the players who have experienced abuse, and some big news coming out around that, as well as some moves and transfers around NWSL. And then we'll dig into the offseason a little bit for the first time together and talk about what you've noticed and what interests you. But I got to ask, how was the trip? How was the Southern Hemisphere? New Zealand versus Australia. You have to pick one now and anger the other one.
Well, for this trip, it feels easy because I went to so many places in New Zealand and just one place in Australia. So I didn't really get to dip around the country in Australia like I did New Zealand. So I'll go New Zealand. It was a bucket list trip. It is absolutely gorgeous. I think one of the things that is most wild is how quickly the terrain changes there. It goes from pristine, beautiful beaches to rainforest jungle to grassy knolls to high peaking mountains, all within 20 minutes of each other. You can have all of those different things, and that to me is wild. It was just extremely beautiful, and I had the time of my life with one of my best friends, so can't beat that.
Now that you can do all those in a 20-minute span, you're a Coloradan. Is mountains first, or are you a beach person? What's the preference?
I love the mountains, but if you give me a beach, I'm going to the beach, especially when you're on vacation. To me, going on vacation and not seeing a beach is a real hard thing for me. I want to see a beach when I'm on vacation. I love that. So we got to go to a couple of beaches, which were really nice. One on the North Island and a national park called Abel Tasman on the South Island, where you have to hike along the coast. You don't have to, but we did a 2-day hike along the coast where you go to these little coves that no one else is in. You're just all by yourself. You can only get there by hiking or getting there by boat. And so it was awesome. It was beautiful.
A 2-day hike means you sleep in a tent?
Well, yes, but we signed up a little late, so we actually got water taxied back to an Airbnb and then water taxied. But there are tents and huts that you can book ahead of time and stay in. We just didn't book quite ahead of time because that's busy season. January, everybody's off work and off school, so within Australia and New Zealand, so everyone's traveling. So we just didn't realize how busy it was going to be.
Yeah, you didn't realize it was holiday, as they like to say.
Holiday. We were on holiday.
Which makes a ton of sense. Yeah. So when we put together our elite Auckland women's professional team, you're already volunteering to go be a part of it?
Oh, yeah, I'll go there for sure. For sure.
Okay.
One other thing that was funny about my trip is when I was in Australia, I was in Melbourne, where the Australian Open is. And so we went to a night, we went to the 4th round.
Love that.
Yeah, it was so much fun. But what was cracking me up is the Aussies just call it the tennis. So, are you going to the tennis?
Yeah.
Oh, I went to the tennis last week, so I had to bring that up. And it's nice to be back and talking about the soccer.
Yeah, 100%. I have been to that site, but not during the Australian Open, so it's a bucket list of mine to go. I've heard it's more party than tennis, which I don't mind.
Yeah, it was very party. But we got tickets to watch a match. So we got to see Coco Gauff, which was so cool. She beat a Canadian, I can't remember the Canadian's name, sorry, in 2-0. So that was a pretty quick game. That was just an hour for that match. And then the next match we saw was Jack Draper, who's an English guy, against an Australian, and I always forget the Australian's name. But it was 5 sets, 2 tiebreakers.
Wow.
The last set was a tiebreaker. It went to all the way to 10. I think it was 10-8 in the tiebreaker. Incredible match. They played for 4
It's wild.
hours.
Yeah.
It's the most grueling sport I think there is. Like, mentally grueling. How can one person play 4 hours and still smack the ball as hard as they do? I don't know, but it was one of the coolest sporting events I've ever been to in my life.
Yeah, I want to go so bad. I've been to that downtown Melbourne area, but not while it was going on. And growing up where I grew up, I go to the US Open every year, which is my favorite. And everyone's like, oh, you got to try Australia. You have to go and be around it. And Australians love sport. That's how they say that too. Instead of the tennis, they'll just be like, oh, do you like sport? And you're like, what? Do you just mean like anything with athleticism in it? Like, and they're like, no, any excuse for us to eat and drink on the side while someone else does something is what they mean. So I'm not shocked by the tennis in all of that. I will say this. I talked to an academy director one time for like one of the big academies. And I was like, do you guys have your kids play other sports, like specifically? And they said they do, it was fencing, jujitsu, and tennis, because they're all one-on-one mental battle sports.
That's interesting.
It is way too much. I was like, we've kind of jumped the shark on this. But the tennis part makes sense. As you said, it is like an insane individual challenge experience.
Like, the guy that ended up winning, Jack Draper, ended up winning the match. In the second set, he slammed his tennis racket and was like mentally so out of it. And somehow he finds a way to muster not only that much energy to play for that long, but to come back from that. I was cheering so loud for him because I was like, how did you just do that?
Yeah.
Most people would just crumble and he didn't. So it was cool.
We are officially an Australian Open podcast now.
Yes.
So we look forward to the French Open.
Podcast.
We will see everyone in Paris for that. And then we will see everyone on the Great Lawn or whatever it's called for Wimbledon. And then in Flushing at the end of the year. And then we'll take off and we'll come back around. This is now a tennis podcast. It is, I'm glad to hear you had a good time. I missed you heavily. We did some shows with some guests, but no one can replace the great Jordan Angelis. So now we're ready to get back into the run of things. And first we have to say, if you haven't listened yet, go back to last Friday where I interviewed a special guest named Jordan Angelis about her new NWSL team that she helped put together in Denver, which has now set the record for the fastest NWSL expansion team to reach 5,000 season ticket deposits, although you more specifically like to say 5,280?
Yeah.
I got it?
Mile High City, yep, 5,280. Exactly, you got it. Mile High City, that is the amount of feet we are above sea level. So, yeah, first to 5,280. I like it.
We just got
I'm
to
seeing so far, Denver.
We just got to keep rolling from there. Do you have a deposit down?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Definitely. There's 2 different deposits. There's like for general seating and then one for premium seating. And I'm like, how fancy do I want to be?
Right. If you're ever going to do it.
I know. Now is the time. But those season ticket deposits are still up there. Go to DenverNWSL.com. Get yours today. That's my pitch. And maybe we'll sit next to each other at the stadium.
I was going to say, I'm already telling everyone, like, oh, are you going to the football? Are you going to the soccer? And then when people say it, I'll be like, oh, I'm going to be in Angelis suite. I'm just going to say Angelis suite. Yeah, I'll be in the suite. I would, if I'm ever going to do it, that would be the game that I do it for as well, as we get excited for the first ever game. So let's dig into our show now. We start with our interview with Yazmeen Ryan. I reached out to the Houston Dash a few weeks ago because this trade kind of broke my brain a little bit, and I was very excited about it. Understandably, Yazmeen had to move, which takes a lot of time and a lot of energy, but we were lucky enough to sit down with her. Let's go to that interview right now. For anyone watching on YouTube, that interview is a separate video that you can go watch, or you can go listen to the podcast anywhere you find your podcast, Soccerwise, and listen to it as well. Jordan, we did this together, so you know what happened, and you know how it went down. I think for starters, one of those people just I was drawn in. You're charmed by to hear her, I think, be very honest and open about her desire to move. And it's one of those things that we talk about in abstracts, right? Especially in soccer, of like, challenge yourself, push yourself, take risks. It was interesting to me to hear her say it, like, why Houston? And it was because it was time for me to take my next challenge, for me to grow. And I think it should be really exciting for Houston fans to hear a lot of that from her.
Leaving that Gotham team with so many big names and big stars, I think, yes, Yazmeen Ryan helped them in what they were trying to do on the field, but I think she has star power to her name and star power herself. And one of the things that she has learned through the 2 different teams that she's been on is how to be a leader. And that is what struck me, Goss, is that she took this as that next step, that she wanted to do that. But it does seem to me that now in her career, even though it's a young career still, she feels like she can have an impact as a leader. And there was a quiet confidence about her leadership. Like, she's never going to be that person that's,
Screaming.
You look on you turn on a game and you see her like yelling at her teammates, but there is something cerebral about how she plays the game that I think is going to help the team around her. And she can lead in that way, how she performs on the field, little things that she's learned in really helping build Gotham from where they were to where they are now. She can bring that now to this Houston team. So I enjoyed chatting with her in that aspect of thinking of herself as a leader within this group and how she wants to set the culture, because it seems like there is a new culture, a new season in Houston.
Yeah, we're going to talk about a lot of the moves, but you said it for her. She has gone from a championship in Portland to moving to Gotham, to a championship at Gotham, now moving to Houston. There's a little bit, and I know this because I have friends who are like this, there's a bit of a startup mentality in her head of like, working for an establishment is too boring. You need the risk of like, it could fail, but it won't fail. And you really get your hands dirty in some of that. And I'm sure many listeners here have that in their lives. It seems like that's something that Yazmeen Ryan enjoys and maybe is looking for again. But last year when we started this show, I think that our first episode, I talked about how much I love watching Yazmeen Ryan play soccer, and I love the way she plays the game. And there are so many things about her game that allowed her to play at every position: technical ability, soccer IQ, athleticism. They fit everywhere, right? There's no position on the field where you're like, you know what would be better if you had a worse first touch and you weren't able to cover ground and you couldn't read the game. But coming out of this year, I wasn't surprised to see her on a national team roster, because those are really useful attributes to have on a national team roster. But as I have said, I couldn't tell you what position she would start in. And even with Gotham, that's the case. It feels like this is her chance to put her mark down and say, I'm going to be the best in the league at this, or I'm going to be the best on my team at this, and it's going to be built around me. And there aren't a ton of players in NWSL right now that I would say that player hasn't gotten there yet, and if they went to the right team, they'd get there. Like, Yazmeen Ryan is on that list of could be this person in a year or two and hasn't been given that opportunity now. Yeah. So I think it's really special that Houston recognized that. Obviously, with the new contract and the amount they gave up to trade for her, they believe in that. And so we're going to get a chance to see it out there on the field. And the expectation isn't trying to win a championship this year, but like, Yazmeen Ryan will be the best player on the field, and we're going to get to see how good a team with her as the star can be.
I feel like if I were Yazmeen and at the place that she's at in her career, the thing that I would be focusing on most this season would be consistency. That every single game, I have an impact in how the result is happening. You know, it doesn't always have to be on the score sheet, but I think that is the place in her game where she can level up. It's just consistency, game in and game out. And when you are a leader on the team, that is expected of you. And when you're a veteran in this league, that is expected of you. So if Yazmeen is consistent this year, this is going to be a difficult Houston team to play, which I think everybody is, as a viewer, you're really excited to watch a Houston team really, truly compete in this league, because that just makes everybody else better. And
for her to accomplish that, it's going to be the hardest it's ever been, because of the responsibility, because of the talent around her being different, also because of the focus from the other team. She's going to be top of the opposition scouting chart. It's going to be how do we shut her down? So now that's a new experience for her to deal with. She mentioned the culture. She mentioned, as you said, sort of the change in the locker rooms. Let's go through some of it with Houston before we move on into some of our breaking news. They sold Tarcion to Lyon for the second highest fee in NWSL history. So right off the back of Naomi Girma breaking the international transfer record, which we all talked about. Oh, and it's for a defender. Tarcion follows it up. We think the number is at 800,000 to go to Lyon. This is for a young, super high ceiling player. But for Houston, it's a no-brainer of this is a massive amount of money for a player who maybe wasn't a starter game in, game out this year if no one came along. And so for this club, this is an opportunity to use this to help build for the future while really not taking a step back on the field right now.
It was a no-brainer, right? You have to sell when you're offered that much money. And I do think Tarciani there is so much potential in who she's going to be as a player. And if you can really tap into that and commit years to help her get to that potential, I think she'll be there. She has all the attributes that you want from a center back: good pace, good recovery, good aerial threat, nice in a challenge, but she needs to read the game a little bit better. So I think if you are Houston and you know that you have Natalie Jacobs, Paige Nielsen, and Katie Lind, who I gotta say, I called her Katie Naughton when we were talking to Yazmeen, Katie Lind back. That's a good core of center backs that can compete there with NWSL experience, and it would have probably been difficult for Tarciani. So you take the money, use that to continue to strengthen this squad, and I think it was the right move for Houston, because one of the things that they were inconsistent in their back line all season last year. If they have some consistency with Jane Campbell behind two really quality center backs who know this league, I feel like they're gonna start off on a much better foot just with some consistency in that key triangle on the field.
And the consistency then comes from the profile of players they've chose to brought in. We bring in, I don't know what words are coming out of my mouth.
Yeah,
the last show we did, I think we talked about Delaney Sheehan coming to Houston. We didn't know about Yazmeen Ryan yet. And what we talked about was raise the floor, bring in experience, stabilize this thing. They have taken that and run with it. They have now traded for Messiah Bright, which Yazmeen talked about. Her former college team had a chance to play with her once again. Danielle Colaprico has come in. They've traded for Kristen Westphal. They've also traded for Abby Smith, who won't be the starter, but you're talking about a backup goalkeeper with 15 starts last year who played in that atmosphere in Gotham. It is wholesale changes, not maybe the sparkling names you'd always expect to see. It's not, bringing in Shawinga to reset things like Kansas City did, but this raises the floor. It gives you a lot of options in the starting lineup, and I think it really sets you in. We are not going to beat ourselves, and now we can sort of figure out what we can be great at.
It feels to me, too, that those players are just hungry. Like, if you take away Yazmeen Ryan and Delaney Sheehan, they haven't won championships. So I think those players, veterans coming in, knowing that they can build a culture, perhaps that's different than they've experienced within NWSL, but they can be here at a change of the tide, right? Be here with Fabrice Catra, who's leading now this team. He knows this league so well, having coached for a number of years, and knows where the potential lies and where he could take these types of pieces and utilize them maybe at a different level and get more out of them. So I think these moves are really intriguing. I feel like what Houston has done in the offseason is intriguing. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a big name signing from them. Yeah. And I think they might need just a little bit of that. You mentioned Shawinga. Can you get someone with a little bit of pizzazz that comes in and adds some flair to this group? But what I see right now is consistency. Good footballers who, from what we heard from Yazmeen, is this team's going to want the ball. And so you need those types of players who are comfortable under pressure, who know the league, the style of play of different teams, how much pressure you get on the ball, how quickly it comes. All those things are already coming with them as they come to this Houston squad.
Although you do have to ask, Messiah Bright, not massive, but a pretty big trade to bring her in. Ordonez is still there, is still an option in those attacking spots. And then I thought it was interesting that Yazmeen Ryan talked about Michelle Alozi as a forward, very specifically, because we saw her play as a wingback at times over the last year under a number of coaches in chaotic formations and all of that. That seems to sort of fill up a lot of that those attacking roles for where you sit. And, you know, I think there should be some excitement, at least I know for myself, of if they play heavier possession, I think that fits Ordonez's game better. She wants to be around teammates. She wants to be able to connect, play off pieces, use decoy runs, those types of things. I think spread out and in transition is not her ideal way to play. So
Gives her
I think
more time
that's
to get in the box too, when
and
the situation.
right. So I think that's a situation where, okay, can you get more from this player? Messiah Bright had a tough year, but you know how good she is, how dominant of a finisher she can be in the box. So I think there's some unearthed gems inside of all of this that can help them improve. And I do wonder if this is one of those teams where, for the work they've done, you say, all right, let's see what it looks like for 3 months. And as you talked about, the back line will be more stable. You'll have a better base to be able to defend from. Can you get to the midway point of this season when all the other leagues sort of open up and look around and then say, okay, what do we want to go spend big on now that we've assessed who we are? And they probably would be in a playoff run still at that point at a minimum. And if it starts really hot, can you convince ownership to go a little bit bigger and maybe bring in a bigger star player to add to all of this? Either way, I think we've had Houston fans who have been excited in our Discord. And if you're not a part of it, you can subscribe to the Patreon. It gets you into the Discord. We're talking NWSL there all the time. And I think we've seen it now over all over social media. And the hope is that a lot of it lands. And Yazmeen Ryan, I think, is going to be a very big part of all of that. Let's talk about her former team for a second on a little bit of breaking news. We get the news today that Midge Purce is returning to Gotham on a 1-year deal coming off, of course, a fully missed season because of the injury. She comes back now to a club that looks a lot different than the one she left for the injury, but also looks a lot different than the one that she was watching all of last year. And this was sort of, I think, under the radar, the biggest story. As we talked about Crystal Dunn and all the other moves, Yazmeen Ryan, all of this going on of what was Gotham doing, there was the reality that maybe the best player on the field in the NWSL Championship 2 years ago was or wasn't going to play for this group. And so some pretty big news for Gotham fans to hear that she's decided to stay.
And well played by Midge Purce, because I think as you started to see what was happening with Gotham in this offseason, by just holding out and waiting, she probably got what she felt like she deserved the whole time. And I'm really interested to see how she comes back from this ACL, because we've seen a number of players do this, and it can change you. It can change your mentality. It can change the way you view the field. It can change just the way you are as a teammate. And I'm excited to see how Midge Purce comes back from this. And it's not always perfect at first, right? Nobody's perfect, but it's not always as you wish it's going to be at first. But I think giving her this amount of time to kind of get back into the groove with her team during preseason, it'll be exciting to see Midge Purce back on this Gotham team and how impactful she can be, because, you know, come a couple months into the year, as she's back into her flow, she's going to be back to where everybody expects her to be, which is a game-changing forward for this Gotham squad.
And this is where, when you look at this Gotham team this year, I think Ella Stevens, in pen, starter, game changer, can break down a defense, can create chances for you. Your hope is Rose Lavelle's fully healthy. And the question was, like, the right wing, who was going to fill in there? They have made signings to fill that spot. Portillo, is expected to be a high-level starter. Jessica Silva brought back on a short-term contract. And I think part of that short-term contract is, like you said, in May and June, now you get the full experience with Midge Purce, and she probably should be a starter. So for a team where everyone's worried about every piece that's leaving, there might be 5 elite attackers for 4 positions. There might be 6 once you get this season going. And so it shows the depth. I think it shows a little bit to what Yael Averbuch-West put in her letter of, like, we think we are still extremely competitive, and we think this roster is still a dangerous one.
Which is what you want. You want that decision as a coach, but it also gives you flexibility depending on who you're playing. Maybe an outside back is better at defending the line than they are defending the space inside towards the box. Well, then you put a player who plays a little bit more like a pocket winger on the right side and can come into the left and shoot with their left. Or you can utilize Midge Purce if the person isn't good in the space and beyond. Well, let Midge Purce cook and go at that defender and say, you're going to have to defend me all day long, trying to get to the end line and getting a service off. I think that is one of the things that makes the best teams in this league dangerous, is that competition on every single line of the field. And Gotham did a good job, especially towards the end of the year, finding a result with more goals, but they were lacking that for the majority of the year, winning 1-0 games, slipping by when it comes to, hey, they could score so many more goals and make this really a show. And I think that is one of the things that Midge Purce loves, is making it a show. And so you bring her back and you add some different variety to your front line.
If you're Gotham as well, you wanted Midge Purce to come back. She's on the sort of revenge tour, the return tour. She's also on a 1-year deal. So she's got everything to play for. And you're going to get a player who, when she plays with edge, is a championship winning player. I think let's talk about the letter for a second, because we hadn't actually planned for it, but we both talked about it a little bit on Monday. And a little unorthodox to have a general manager put a letter out publicly. I think it comes from just the total uproar we have sort of seen, at least online, about what's going on with Gotham. And we had Pardeep on last week. She talked about this a little bit. She was at Gotham Media Day. We talked with Taylor Vincent the week before that about what's going on with Gotham. It has been an endless conversation. Part of what I think has been a little confusing to me is it felt like they tooled up into this super team last year, and it seems quite clear now that that just wasn't fully sustainable. And so there seems to be a level of frustration of why are so many players leaving, and it's like, because not everyone had enough minutes, and their salary cap has its limits. And it feels like now Gotham is settling into like the way a team probably should be built. And yet still, when fully healthy last year, is down about one starter. Like you could say, Mandy Freeman won the job last year, that whatever role it was, that at right mid, would say is the one opening that is now has to be replaced. And Midge Purce can be a big part of that. That this team hasn't really taken a step back when it comes to top end. Probably depth is where the real conversation goes. What did you make of the letter and the need to write it, and what you've seen from Gotham?
Last year at this time, we were leaving the NWSL draft, seeing some of the moves that Gotham was making within the draft and then apart from it. And there were a lot of eyes on Gotham about what are they building, and oh my goodness, this looks like a super team. And I think, so there was just as much conversation about them last year as there is now this year, which is interesting, but it is the opposite, right? Because players are leaving, and it seems from an outside perspective, why are all these players leaving? I think that is what everybody's curious about. But I think with success comes opportunities. Jenna Neiswanger, that's an opportunity that I think pretty much anybody would take. If you could go play for Arsenal in England, that is a really cool opportunity. For Yazmeen Ryan and Delaney Sheehan, it's a time to start something new and build something where maybe you feel like you've built up enough to be a leader on a team. So I think the conversation, or the letter from Yael Averbuch, is interesting, because it almost feels like, sometimes you get this from GMs, like it's the start of a new year and this is what's going on. But it felt like it was a little bit of an explanation of like, hey, everybody stick with us. We got this. And I have no reason to not trust Yael Averbuch and what she's building there, because what she has done so far has been excellent. Is the team going to look different than it did last year? Yes, but it looked very different from the year before when they won a championship. So I think one of the things about NWSL, especially when we go into this area of free agency that we're seeing now, it's going to look different in off seasons, and people are going to ask these questions, and might as well just throw it out there and say, hey, this is what we're doing. So you feel like there's a little bit more of communication between the front office and the fans. I think that's what the thought maybe was behind it.
There was a couple phrases in the letter, and I don't know who they were directed at or if I'm reading it wrong, which did feel like a commentary on minutes aren't guaranteed here. And you go back to last offseason, you look at some of the names that came in, and there are players who probably expected to play, and there are probably players in that expected to play if they performed at the right level and trained at the right level. And then what you ended up with was like 18 of those. And so you could only start 11. And I think there was sort of it felt like there was commentary in the letter of like, and we're not going to step away from that. So we're not going to guarantee anyone minutes. And I think the other thing to think about here, and unfortunately we don't have the full numbers, so we can't fully break this down, but what it feels like from the outside is they took a risk last year on building a super team that normally has very short shelf life. And it was sort of like, we can do it, let's do it. And the idea is to win there, and winning then quells all problems. They didn't. And now this is the reality. The reality is if you're going to spend big money on the Rose Lavelles and the Esters of the world, you probably need to supplement it with some college players who are on, smaller deals that are first breaking in, new players to the league who are looking for opportunities, as well as some veterans who maybe are willing to take a different type of deal because they want to stay where they want to be. This is a more logical build for a roster. It's just so odd to see because in the middle, you have this super team all of a sudden. And, and then on the flip side, Matian and Sam Hyatt and Delaney Sheehan, they look at it and say, we're starters. Why are we here? And that's all correct. Like all of it is right. And the reality is that that's just the situation they got stuck in. And like you said, they still come into this year as a really dangerous team. They still come into this year, I think, with a ton of expectations.
Right. And I just is very curious to me too, because you go into a team with this knowledge, hey, we're building this team. Also, it's a coach in Juan Carlos Amaros who switches up his lineup every single game. He's done that since he's been in this league. So you had to go in, I would think, as a player thinking, it doesn't matter really how I performed last week. How am I performing right now to make sure that I have a spot? It doesn't even matter who I used to be. It's like day to day with Juan Carlos, how he sees the chess game playing out that weekend. So we'll see. It'll be interesting as this season develops for Gotham. They still have really good pieces, and I'm excited to see Gabby Portillo play and Purce come back, and some of the leaders that are now going to have the more majority of the minutes because maybe you have a little bit more solid of a lineup that you can go to week in and week out. But then again, I just said that. So I don't know if Juan Carlos will continue his switching everything up all the time.
We're going to talk about the players we're most excited to watch, the moves we are most interested by. This isn't one of them, but I mentioned her name already. Ella Stevens, game in and game out. That's going to be fun. I think as she settles and has the confidence, that's when she's at her best. And so knowing she'll be in the lineup a little bit and knowing maybe there's responsibility on her shoulders, because remember, when we saw her at her best last year, it was during Olympic breaks. It was in moments where she felt like she had to carry the team in ways or she couldn't rely on the other stars. And so I'm excited to see that this season. Let's go into the second biggest story of the week, which is the trade of Savvy King to Angel City from Bay FC. Overall, it is some combination of $300,000 in transfer fund and allocation fund and all of that put together, plus a 10% sell-on fee for Bay FC if Angel City does go on to sell what is a very young player. And that's sort of the one way to protect yourself against giving up this asset and then it ends up being this huge deal further down the road. It is a tough move, I think, for Bay FC. It is sort of swallowing the medicine early here of the fact that in their expansion year, they kind of blew one of their biggest assets. It ends up not being a major part of their team, and yet they're able to salvage something out of it. And for Angel City, they continue their rebuild under Mark Parsons, still without a full-time head coach. Let's start with Angel City here. What's your view on this addition to this roster right now?
I would be surprised if this wasn't a trade asked for by Savvy King. She's from Santa Monica, and she played 18 games last year, but didn't really, as you said, get that starting role within this group. This is a player who has all the potential in the world to be one of the best defenders, not just in this league, but with the U.S. Women's National Team too. She has a lot of good qualities. So I think for Angel City, they pick her up, but this is a young back line for Angel City. They have her, they have Giselle Thompson. Those two, if you think about those two playing outside back, because no more Jasmine Spencer with Angel City, there could be some major playing time for those two. I am curious, and this is the biggest thing that I think as this league develops and it does go to more of a youth movement is how are you going to develop these youth players, right? Savvy King's 19 years old.
Yep.
She played 1 year of college, now 1 year as the pros. She is still in a key critical developmental phase. So can Angel City utilize these players that they have at this key phase? Because it's still Alyssa Thompson's in that mix, Giselle, they have Kennedy Fuller, they now have Savvy King. You have to give these players environment to develop, which means you have to trust them, you have to put confidence in them, and you have to allow them to make mistakes. They have to make mistakes. And that's the only way that they're going to grow, if you create this really nice environment for them. But on the flip side of that, Goss, you're playing professional soccer. You have to perform, and winning matters, and championships are talked about all the time. That's a hard place to develop what you need to for these young players. So maybe it'll be better at Angel City because they have a bigger group of youth players. I think it'll be important who they choose as a head coach, but I think it's a good pickup. Like I said, I think Savvy King could be a really key outside back, a left-footed player who plays on the left side, has good endurance to get up and down, but she's going to need developed, and you have to put time into players like that, and you have to give them the right resources to be able to get better.
It's one of the things, and I'm jumping right to the Bay side because it's just one of these things that's running through my head, which is why it was kind of an odd pick for an expansion team that had spent so much money to be good day one. And it just, I know hindsight's 2020, but when you look back and you look at Corey Bethune taking third and then Hal Hirschfeld taking fifth right behind Savvy King, it is, I think, very hard for Bay to look at that. And I think it will be for a while. This probably compensation for her gets you close to this is a huge, this is just behind what Yazmeen Ryan earned, and the 10%, if she gets sold eventually, for the numbers we're looking at now, it probably equals out to 400, 500,000. That's a lot of money. So it's not nothing, but you look at this team, what would they have been last year if they had one of those two players I just mentioned, who, not just that they're good, but they were 4-year college vets, 5-year college vets, and there were injury question marks and all of that, but it was just a different position. And Savvy King as a defender coming in, were they going to let her make mistakes, right? Were they really set up in a way to allow that to happen? And so maybe it was just we couldn't look past this talent, and the hope was that they were good enough year 1 or 2 that they could let her come along slowly, and maybe all of a sudden it hits year 3 where you're getting basically a first-round draft or number 1 draft pick talent later on when you don't have a high draft pick, which maybe they didn't know the draft was going away, so that's also a reasonable issue. But I think that's some of the frustration, was drafting a player who you knew needed this without thinking about how you were going to give her that opportunity. And now she comes to an Angel City team where, as you said, there's a cohort of this group. They are in a rebuild, so there is probably some minutes this year to say, yeah, you can make mistakes. We're going to take risks. We're not trying to turn it on and win at this exact moment. We are building towards something bigger going forward. And I do think stylistically it fits a little bit better, because what we saw from Bay was a team when they were at their best that sat in a deeper block, and there's just not room to do what she does well. Right. And so if you're looking at a team now in Angel City who are going to have more possession, so there are moments that she can pick and choose to get into the attack and then use her counter-pressing ability and then use her endurance to get back and recover. Those are the things that maybe can take her to the next level. And I think this should be exciting. This goes along with the move for Alana Kennedy to come into this back line. We don't know what's happening with Gillis. Originally, she said she wanted to come back. Now it sounds like she wants to stay in Europe. But you still have Sarah Gordon on that back line. And so you've kind of retooled that position, which needed it for Angel City. You've done it while still having an eye towards the future and bringing in young pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they just need to get the head coach position right, which is maybe why we haven't heard an announcement yet. Because this is a team who I think we've seen go up and down so much, where you have one of the best environments in NWSL. You should be winning your home games at least, right? Mm-hmm. You should be dominant at home. And that is one of the areas where they haven't been good enough. So can they bring in a coach who demands the right mentality out of this group, but also plays to the style and the benefit of so many of the players that they already have? And I think the leadership of Alana Kennedy will be really crucial in that back line to help lead this team too.
Let's go to our last big piece of news for today. Rebecca Bernal leaving Liga MX Femenal and then heading north and heading to a place that a lot of people like to go to, which is the Washington Spirit. They've already brought in Narumi this offseason. Obviously, Andy Sullivan expected to be out for the full season, but Bernal comes in now to just add another option to this squad. What do you make of this move, and were you surprised maybe that it was Washington?
Surprised a little bit that we don't see a ton of Mexican internationals come back to NWSL after the first few years where we saw, the work together with Canada and Mexico and the United States to send their players to NWSL. Now in these past few years, we really haven't seen that. We have Diana Ordonez, we have Maria Sanchez, but that's it, I think. So I think that was a big surprise to me, especially Bernal has been with Monterrey for 7-8 years. She has been consistent for them. But I like it. I think that it would be good. A strong central player. Pretty sure she can play as a holding mid, but she can play as a center back as well. So she gives you a little bit of versatility if need be, which I think maybe lacked a little for this Spirit squad in that push. When they lost Andy, they had to shuffle some things, and maybe they're thinking, all right, how can we get players who can fit multiple pieces, which I think you might get from Narumi, you get from Bernal. Strong defensive midfielder, right? She'll win balls, she'll deny space. This is a player that I think is interesting, and I'm intrigued to see how she truly fits into Geraldo's system and what he's trying to do there.
Yeah, it feels like a combination of a replacement for Boutel as well as a fill-in for Sullivan, right? That flexibility, it gives you both ways. It also feels, along with the Esme Morgan addition, of Jonathan Geraldes wants good passers out of the back. And so if she is playing at that center back position, you have confidence with her ability the ball at her feet. And you then can fill in that central midfield role if you want something a little bit more of a destroyer. My assumption being that Narumi's getting the starts out the gate, and that's maybe a little light in midfield against some other teams, where I think we saw Hal Hirschfeld's limitations as a pure defensive midfielder without Andy Sullivan out there last year. So now you get some of those elements in this player, but also have that flexibility to have a third center back if you need so, or switch formations, which gives you the option. I would not be shocked if Jonathan Geraldes has an off season to work and is like, can I build a few different concepts in here that I can swap in and out of, whether it's during the game or around games. So it is, I think, makes a ton of sense as a move. As you said, it's a little surprising because in Liga MX Femenal, there's money, and the money is spent first on Mexican internationals to keep them home and keep them a part of it. And then we are starting to see Abby Erceg, I believe, just announcing that she will head down to Mexico. We saw Henry go down there last year. There are big names and big stars as well. There's normally more value there for the player than coming to NWSL. I do think there is a little element, though, of Geraldes and Michelle Kang of like, this is a really cool project. And if they approach you, you have to at least consider it in a way in which maybe a player like this wouldn't have even thought about it a year or two ago.
And I think Bernal is, I looked this up, but I want to say she's 27. Mm-hmm. She's in this prime of her career where if that was me too, I had been at a club for a long time. I'm thinking, all right, how can I challenge myself a little bit more? Seeing success that she's had in last year, thinking about Mexico beating the United States, right? Tapping into that and say, okay, that was a challenging game and I loved that. How can I get that week in and week out? okay, I want to go to NWSL and try my fare there. And what a place to land, because if you're going to develop, you're going to do it under one of the best coaches in the world.
Yep, absolutely. And again, I think more excitement for Washington fans as they look to try and get over the hump that was last year, the final, but trying to win the whole thing for the first time under Michelle Kang. Let's close up with our final story of the day. It is one of the biggest stories and one we are still learning a lot about. But the official news coming out that the NWSL is going to be forced to pay restitution for players who experienced abuse in a $5 million fund that was created and to be monitored, I believe, by the attorneys general of the 3 states filing the case in New York, Washington, D.C., and Illinois. This $5 million restitution fund is not a gift, nor is it justice. This fund exists because players refused to be silenced, and we found the courage to stand together as a collective, said Tori Hooster of the NWSLPA. This fund is an acknowledgement of unique failures and the harm suffered by players. It's a testament to the players' courage and a necessary step toward accountability. If the NWSL is safer today, is because of players fought to make it that way. So alongside the fund, part of the ruling that came down is the need for NWSL to continue to update the 3 attorney general's offices about the way they are carrying out the safeguards that were put into place coming out of the Yates report. So it says among the safeguards that are mandated to continue to include comprehensive vetting of certain team personnel, mechanisms for players to report abuse, player access to free and unlimited counseling, access to a league safety officer, and policies that prevent teams from investigating themselves. We are not legal experts, so we don't fully understand what we're talking about, which is why we're sort of waiting for the legal experts to weigh in. On the one hand, I think really powerful statement from Tori Hooster about, first of all, the fight that was necessary to get to this point, and then I think really incredible that the work and focus is being done to make sure that this never happens again. And it's not just, I want revenge and I want to see what already occurred be changed, but to ensure the fact that this does not occur again in the future.
Mm-hmm. And really brave from some of those players that stood up to do that. So, yeah, it feels weird talking about that. There's money in this, right? It's rightfully theirs. They were injured in this. That mentally, the emotional injuries that it feels like a little bit of a kind of way to put the past behind us. And, I wasn't aware that this was still ongoing. So I think when this news came out today, it kind of was like, oh, well, this feels like something that is rightful to these women who stood up and are a part of those lawsuits that happened. So, yeah, it just feels one step at a time, like we can close chapters, and hopefully these women feel like they too can close that and continue to move on in the right way because of all the things that they have done to stand up for this.
Yeah, absolutely. We owe a lot to those players. Unfortunately, it was their, burden to carry. And we hope that this brings a little bit of closure, but also the fact that coming out of a year in which we had the reports out of San Diego, to have a conversation consistently and a focus on how do we make sure this doesn't happen? Because anytime you sort of let up, there seems to be a backslide, and there can't be that. And it has to be discussed and discussed and discussed so that it doesn't occur again, because that would be the worst way for all of this to end, is for us to have a conversation, for us to have all of these investigations, all of these policies put in place. And if you don't follow them correctly, then they can't work. And so the hope is, and I think that goes as well with the new CBA, more power for players, which can get them get them out of situations, more influence from players as well. And I think we have seen now some clubs that have started to be taken over by former players, and that has changed the experience as well, because those players have an understanding of what the current players are going through. Let's finish off here and let's talk about our off-season reactions. It has been news after news after news. I didn't text you about it because you were on the side of mountains and I didn't want to get in your face. I have been freaking out. I've been trying to update some depth charts. I will clean them up again over the course of this week. If you want access to them, subscribe to our Patreon. You get those as a subscriber to Soccerwise. Also get you access to our Discord. We were hanging out and talking about NWSL all the time. let's start here. There are a lot that have happened. Do you have one favorite move, whether it's for the player's point of view or the team's point of view, or something bigger about the sport that you have seen so far in the offseason?
I wrote two moves really that I am excited about. Two different teams, I would say. First off, I am excited, which is interesting because so many people are leaving San Diego. I'm excited Kenza Dali is playing for the San Diego Wave team. Because when we were talking about the Wave over the last few years, it did feel like they were missing a piece centrally that could help them connect and be that connection from the really good wingers that they have in Sanchez and Cascarino now to their back line and some of the good defensive work that they have had over the number of years. Now that is changing, and how they're going to build under Jonas Eideval. I think we're all really excited to see that. But this is a coach who wants the ball, and he wants to play through his key players. And I think having Dali there changes Savannah McCaskill's role and allows her to be a little bit more free in what she does, and it allows Dali to be the connector, the 10, the final passer to players like Cascarino, who, if you remember last year, I'm thinking this girl has the potential to be MVP in NWSL in 2025. So I like that move because I think it really helps them in their midfield. They also signed two other midfielders, Gia Corley and Nigerian Favor Emmanuel, who sound like they could be a 6 and an 8, or an 8 and a 6 respectively, and can really help hold down the center of midfield as they progress the ball and use Dali and some of her vision, some of her experience as a French international. I'm interested. I'm really interested to see how that move works out.
I did not think excitement would start with San Diego and incoming transfers. So you did a good job to get there. I think what you said makes a lot of sense. We talked about Cascarino last year. I am also very excited about what she could be when she has settled. And this is a team looking for like a face and a star, because Jaden Shaw has left, Naomi Girma has left, Alex Morgan has retired. A lot of other pieces are gone. Yeah. Like, who is going to be the one that carries this team through tough moments? And I think you're talking about sort of having that setup to allow those players to have that platform. I'm surprised by that. I think it's really interesting. It is also shows how nerdy this show is, because mine, and I don't know why, mine is Matian. I think Chicago, they had a great start to the year. You were waiting for the attacking support to come. Ludmilla comes in. You get Grosso over the line, and then you lose Sam Staub. And so I think Matian has the ability to be a starting center back for this team. And if Staub does come back faster than we expect, which Pardeep said she was happy and excited at media day, then you can bring her into midfield, and probably not the same level of passer, but like I think about what Zornoza brought to Utah last year as she came into the team and was able to just settle things and be a consistent force in that central midfield. This is just another player, not the same as Ryan, but another piece where she's clearly a starter in this league. I think she's a high-level starter, and I think you're going to a team where you can see all of her attributes and all of her abilities, and then that can affect the rest of this team. Because last year, once they finally got the attacking talent in the door, they could not stop anyone. And so it wasn't, what can Mal Swanson and Ludmilla do? It's, is Chicago even close by the time they're able to get opportunities and a chance, a time to get opportunities and get chances. So that was one that really interested me, and I think kind of went under the radar.
I think Waitane is going to be great in Chicago, but I put Chicago under my list of, like, I don't think they've done enough. I don't think they've done enough in this offseason to bolster a team who needed help last year. And I think that she will help, because then you can, whether you build off of her and Carrie Recaro, who has a new last name, and it's escaping me right now at this moment, or you push her into the midfield. There's options there, but it feels like there's still maybe a couple of moves away, and I would have liked to see maybe another move. There's also questions of Mal Swanson and what's going on. She didn't report to preseason, so I think question marks about Chicago. I want them to do more. But another team that I thought I'm really interested in. And I've been tooting their horn at the end of season, and I thought that they were going to make the playoffs, is Utah.
Mm-hmm.
Utah is a squad who I think really did a good job. They bring in Alex Soweta, which she is an elite talent in this league, coming off an ACL, but they don't have to demand a
Right.
lot of her right away with Tejada in the midfield as well. But they bring in not just a right back in Ana Maria Guzman, the Colombian international. Remember her from the World Cup? Gosh, she didn't play at all, and then she played in the knockout round and crushed it.
Okay, no, but yeah.
Okay, she's coming from Bayern Munich. She's a right back, and then they bring in a Spanish left back, and these two players are known for getting into the attack.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that, oh my gosh, why am I thinking Jimmy
Konrads.
Yeah, Jimmy Konrads talked about so much last year is timing. When can you get in? When can you get in? I think this is going to up the level significantly of this Utah team, who was arguably one of the top 3 teams in the last couple months of season, and how they were performing, how difficult it was to play against them. I think that they are going to hit the ground running with some really good additions there, essentially with Huerta, but also Guzman and Rabano, that right and left back.
Carry on Wualo. It took me that whole time to find it.
Yes.
So I've been working on that, but I was listening as well.
Yes.
I agree with you. I like that for starters. You went around the world, came back, and the Utah love stayed the entire time. I think it is, like you said, it feels like they have taken a development, a step on from where they were. Let me just throw this out about Chicago before we move on.
Okay.
The Mel Swanson stuff is that's the nuclear button. If that doesn't go right, there's nothing about this team. I think that the hope is that you barely saw what you could get from Grosso and Ludmilla, and the work was done last year. And that's the offseason. The offseason was last July, and that those players are able to bring another level this year now that they're settled. That's my only argument there. For Utah, I think it's great. I think there's some really interesting moves. Similar, I think we could see a lot more from Chloe Lacoste this year than what we saw last year now that she's settled.
She tore ACL.
Oh, she tore her ACL?
Yeah.
Where did I miss
End of
this?
the season. End of the season. It was against
Okay.
City. A really hard challenge. Yeah, it was terrible.
Well, then I won't talk about that, and then that won't be a thing that I'm excited about this year, which is terrible. I was going to ask next, who are you most excited to see from a team point of view? Feels like Utah's pretty high up there for you.
Utah's high up there. We talked about it before the offseason happened, that we were all looking at Houston and what they were going to do. I'm interested.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see what Houston is going to do with a new head coach. So many of these veteran players coming in, they have the most potential of growth. And I think everybody is looking about what's going to happen in Texas. So I would say, those two teams probably excite me the most, just because I think I'm excited to see how Utah uses these pieces to take the next step. But Houston, I'm excited just to see what it's going to look like in general.
I think Houston is definitely first 2 weeks of the year must watch, live game up on TV if they're on at the same time as other people, to see what is this and how invested should you be and how much can we learn from it and how stable is it all. I think that one makes a ton of sense. For me, it's North Carolina. They have the most returning minutes of any team. And so there's a lot of talk about loss with them because Caroline has left, and that's such a big name, and Nairumi has left, and that's a huge name, and there's a lot of loss in there. But you take a ton of stability and you add Jaden Shaw to that, and that could be really, really fun. I have spent months on this show talking about how much I love watching Ashley Sanchez play with this group. Now add Jaden Shaw to the mix there. I think the versatility across the front line is really, really exciting for this group. That is not a new element, but it's a different element with the attributes these players have. I'm excited to see what position Shaw plays most of the time, or where on the field she finds herself most of the time. And if you look at the top 5 from last year, and I think it felt pretty clear coming into the playoffs, it was the top 4. It was a bottom sort of 4, and North Carolina sat in the middle in their own little space. they have made the moves to try and make the jump, and I'm just curious to see if it happens.
Yeah. I will add too, they add Hannah Betfort from Utah, which if you're going to look at the numbers of Hannah Betfort, it's not going to tell the whole story. Until she scored her first goal last year, she had the biggest range of goals to expected goals.
Yeah.
She had like 5 XG. She was right there. And I just imagine this player with those pieces around her that you just mentioned, where she can just almost be a dummy player at times, a player to pull defenders away, and then you create space for somebody else. She is one of the most unselfish 9s in the league, and how Sean Nahas and his creative mind utilizes her presence. It might not be always 90 minutes, but which games he uses her, how he uses her, and then how she can be a presence in the box. I like that move for them, and I think it's going to really pay off with the creative minds they have surrounding her.
I think it's a lot like the role Ashley Hatch played last year. When she was on the field, a lot of what she did was creativity or drawing pressure from that central area to allow attacking 10s or the best winger in the league to find themselves in dangerous spaces. And I think Betfort could do a lot of that. And as you said, there's more finishing in there. Plus, you're going to a North Carolina team that it is more predictable, the chances that you will get. And so I think it makes it a little easier for a center forward to sort of practice those finishes, practice those chances, and have confidence when they get into those final areas. Last one here, and then we'll get out of here. Fantastic show. Once again, thank you to Yazmeen Ryan for taking the time to join us. Thank you to Houston Dash for setting that one up. We still got a lot to talk about in NWSL over the course of this preseason. Who are you waiting for? Who, when your alerts go off, whatever you choose to subscribe to, however, you get your news, are you saying like, it has to be this team? I need this team to do more.
I feel like there's a couple of teams that are a little bit more quiet. I feel like I just voiced that I think Chicago could be one of those teams. I think the Pacific Northwest has been a little quiet.
Yeah.
Seattle's been quiet. Portland have been quiet. And those are really big clubs, right? I think they're building, at least in the Seattle, it looks like they're building a little bit more youth into their group. But yeah, I would say maybe that's where my mind goes right away.
Yeah. I think Portland is probably further along because from the outside, I think Portland is saying we weren't that far off last year.
Yeah,
we had Sophia Smith, now Sophia Wilson had crazy injuries. If we're healthy and all of the Olivia Moultrie, like if we're healthy, we have all these pieces together, Weaver, all of that, we're probably not that far off. I think they've solidified at center back. I think Seattle is interesting because we don't know, like how serious are they trying to build for this year? I think Chicago's a fair one. The other one for me is Louisville. It feels like everything's been a loss out. They've brought in some college pieces and some younger players. They were not that far off. I know we said this every year. 9th place, it is the worst place to be in, but like we saw a lot of positive things, especially in central midfield. There is some really interesting combinations this team can put together in central midfield, but it has to be better defensively, and they need depth. So they are one of those teams that I would have liked to see be in for some of these pieces Houston has brought in, where it's a Westfall or bringing in more depth at center back or whatever it is. And so I'm still waiting to see what they do and how they sort of find their feet in the modern NWSL as teams are starting to stretch things higher on the top end. Louisville's in a unique market. I think it's sustainable. I think there's very clear ways to make it something that players want to be a part of and that can be competitive, but they kind of have to find that road and start to really hammer what makes them different that allows them to compete with the other teams in this league. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch. Orlando's making moves. They set a transfer record. We saw Shawinga sign a contract extension. That's a huge move as well. All of that sort of on the top end. Washington continues to put pieces together. Gotham continues to shift things. We don't have a coach still in Angel City. Becky Tweed just got hired as an assistant coach in San Diego. So there's always something to talk about. There's always something to do. And now we've got Jordan Angeli back with us for us to do it every single week. So Jordan will be back next week to help us cover all things NWSL on Wednesday live on YouTube, or you can just listen to it wherever you get your podcast. So thank you to all of you for listening. Thank you to Henry in the chat. I think we had a San Diego fan as well, calling them the San Diego French because of the French connection that we are setting up out there. So we will talk to all of you again very, very soon.
Wow, we